Today I'm going to show you guys how all of my analog gear works with my DAW.
True Sound Studios is in your ears.
So obviously it's no surprise that for the most part everybody is using some sort of digital recording studio tool these days, and you find less and less studios owning as much analog gear as this, and honestly this isn't even that much compared to some of the other bigger studios. So the reason I like analog gear is because when I started a studio about 18 years ago, digital recording was just coming around, and at that time it sounded good, but not like it does today. So do I think analog sounds better than digital? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. If you have a console like this that you have to constantly maintain and you have to be worried about noise issues, it can be a real problem. I happen to be really good at electronics and soldering and fixing things, so for me, it's not as big of a deal. But I think for a lot of people, it's a little bit too much, not to mention just the sheer amount of space that it takes up. So anyways, with all that being said, I love analog, I love digital. I love having a DAW where I can copy and paste and edit and just do so many amazing things with a computer. But I also like to just reintroduce that analog sound and that, more importantly, the analog workflow that I'm just very used to using. Okay, so let's take a look at how I use all this analog gear with my DAW. So here's the full look here at True Sound Studios. This is all of the analog and digital gear that, for the most part, I use on a day-to-day basis. So the entire studio is based around this GL4000 Allen & Heath 40-channel input console. As well as the 40 input channels, there's also 4 stereo buses, the main output. There is 10 auxiliary sends. There is a matrix output, which is essentially an extra set of outputs, along with a whole bunch of other stereo inputs and outputs for other devices. So this is how I use this analog console in the world of digital recording. The first 24 channels on the console essentially are all of my inputs. So this is what I connect all the drums, guitar, acoustic guitar, the iso-cab for electric guitars, bass, vocals. So this is where all those inputs run into. Each channel has its own independent phantom power, phase. You can select the mic or line input. Has a gain knob. You can roll up the low end. It has a 4-band sweepable EQ. You can also engage and disengage the EQ. And it's kind of like the British sound. They call it like a British style EQ. And then you have 10 auxiliary sends, and then you can also make the 10th send a direct output, which is how I pretty much route all of the outputs of all these channels to the converters. So the console also has obviously pre and post buttons for all the aux sends, a pan knob, mute, PFL. These are all the group buttons, and then obviously you have the master fader. So as you can see up top here, these are the typical inputs that I use. Obviously any of these can be changed at any point, but you got all your drums, guitar, acoustic. I have an isolation cab for electric guitar. We got the bass, vocals, an effect vocal, and then this is the talkback channel, and then to control the click track separately from the console. So obviously all the signal comes into the channel, and then depending on what it is or what I want to use, I can patch in any of the DBX compressors that I have. We got a couple DBX 160As, 163X. I got 5 160X compressors, along with 8 channels of API 550A EQs. We got some Trident preamps if you wanted to patch in those. So any of those things can be patched into any of the 24 input channels on the console. So now you got all the signal coming in. How I route it out is dependent on the instrument. So for drums, I use all of the direct outputs, mainly because I feel like it's just easier because there's so many channels just to nicely route it with the direct outputs. But for guitar and vocals and bass and stereo instruments, I use actually the aux sends. For the most part, I'm only recording one mic at a time, and even so, you can obviously send things to wherever. But so essentially what I have is these are all like essentially buses. I'm just kind of sending independent channels to the console, but vocal channel, a guitar channel, bass channel, and then this is for stereo. Separately, that does a separate thing. I can send obviously outputs to headphone monitors. So I got a couple of drum ones. We have the reverb for the Lexicon reverb unit, and then the frequency analyzer, which you guys may have seen quite a bit, is over here. So I really like using the frequency analyzer, especially, you know, on drums and guitars, and just helping, you know, get rid of some of those problem frequencies that you might have. So like I said, drums get sent through the direct outputs, and then those go straight to the SSL converters, also known as an interface if you want to call it that. And then all the rest of the channels, the guitar, the bass, the stereo instruments, vocals, go to the auxiliary sends, and then those outputs then go to the SSL converters. So then that signal gets converted from analog to digital, goes through a MADI cable to a MADI SSL card to the computer, and now gets recorded inside of our DAW. So I particularly use Cakewalk Sonar Platinum, if you haven't known by now. So obviously now that it's in the DAW, I can do things like, you know, I can send it to other buses in the DAW. You can add plugins. Obviously, you can edit it and do whatever you want. Now, fairly typically, this is my normal setup. Down here, you can see kick drum and the snare drum actually have their own dedicated channel because I do the most processing on kick and snare. But then all the buses inside of the DAW kind of get grouped together. So we got the drum bus, we got a guitar channel, guitar leads or synth leads or anything like that, reverb, more verb, drum room, early reflection, bass channel, the main vocals, and then backup vocals, and then parallel compression for vocals. So all of these all have separate dedicated outputs. So I have a maximum of 20 outputs, so I can send 20 different individual outputs, or obviously you can send stereo outputs, which is what I do on most things, except for like bass, main vocals, kick and snare, that's all mono. But so all of these outputs then, all 20 of them, come back to the SSL Alpha Link converters, and then comes out of a few snake cables and then back into the right side of the console. So here is actually where the most amount of processing goes on. These channels for the most part stay this way. It's kind of like, you know, my normal mixing stuff. Obviously anything can change, and it does. But even some things like the parallel compression channels down here have a little EQ on them to kind of scoop out the things that I like to do. Things like the kick and snare have their own separate EQ. Kick and snare actually come over to our DBX160A compressors, and as you can see here, they're kind of firing away. The mono channel is actually for the main vocal only, and then there is a separate bass channel. And then I can use these other ones, but for this particular project, this is all I'm using. So now essentially all of these channels are now going to be bussed one more time to the actually main output section here on the console. So for example, with our kick drum channel right here, for example, bus 1 and 2 is the actual main output. 3 and 4 is our parallel compression channel. And then 7 and 8, this is actually how I route all the signal to headphones. So then channel 1 and 2 comes over to here. So this is our group, this is our bus. So this is left and right. So this, through the send and returns, goes to the Audio-Scape bus compressor. And then that comes back and is actually routed to our mono and left and right, which happens to be our main outputs. Which is how I control the main output. And actually that is split to the speakers, and then when everything is all summed all together, it's actually recorded back into the DAW. Now I do have a parallel compression channel, and over here, especially I use it on kick and snare. Bus 3 and 4 is my parallel compression channel, and this is the fader for it, so left and right. And that's actually sent through the send and returns all the way over here to the DBX 266XL and the BBE 362, and I'm pretty much just really destroying the drums with this, taking out treble and bass. But that comes back over to here, is routed through the main outputs again, and essentially I can mute the main outputs and just turn up only parallel compression, and obviously mix this in to the final output. And then over here is 7 and 8. This is for the headphones. And then 5 and 6 is actually not hooked up. I'm just waiting for another stereo bus compressor. So I'm able to run 20 outputs from the DAW into the SSL converters and then back through here, but you see there's only 16 channels, but actually these first 4, the blue ones, are stereo channels, so that's how you get the 20 inputs. But one more thing, I actually used the direct outputs on this part of the console to send to the TOA monitor, and this allows me to just monitor the signal coming back into the console a little better. For example, from my vantage point, you can see some of the fader caps actually cover up the 4-segment LED input monitor indicators. And so I really wanted a way to, make sure I was getting adequate signal coming back out of the console. So that's what this does, and is doing nothing more than just monitoring signal. And then so the only other thing that I was talking about is with the Matrix buses. This is like a separate output section on the console, like just another output. So what I do is, because these are our main outputs, I'm able to route Matrix A and B as another stereo output over here. And this is actually how I control the Dyne audio speakers, the Polk audio speakers, this guy and this guy, along with this is actually on Matrix C. It is a mono small little 2-inch speaker. So once again, these are all of my input channels, and this is essentially what I'm plugging in all my mics and line signals and direct boxes into. That then goes to the converters. The converters go to the DAW. The DAW then outputs them as separate outputs back to the converters, into the console on the right hand side of the console, back through more analog gear, finally ending up at the main bus, blended with some parallel compression, through the Audio-Scape bus compressor to the main outputs, and then is recorded ultimately back into Sonar as a stereo mixed file. So I know this is not the easiest setup. There is a ton of connections. There is so much going on and routing and ins and outs that it really is kind of confusing. If you are looking at buying analog gear, or maybe even particularly an analog console to use with your DAW, and you want to know some more information on this, maybe that I didn't cover, feel free to either comment in this video or send me a private email, and we can have a conversation, and I can give you a little bit more advice and some more information on the workflow between a DAW and an analog console. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to stay up to date with True Sound Studios on a day-to-day basis, follow us on our Instagram page. I post on Instagram every single day, and I'll keep you guys up to date with everything that's going on with the studio. If you're new to our YouTube channel and you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more content. You can also listen to or purchase any of the beats that I personally make right here at True Sound Studios on our SoundCloud page, True Sound on the Beat. You can find all the links in the description below this video. So once again, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'm Ryan Weezna. We're here at my studio, True Sound Studios, and True Sound Studios is in your ears.